Sanji Chodan Soji Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dagi Jinso Jibe Sunam Shi Rola Pinchra Sanji Dropa Shun Sanji Chodan Soji Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dane Chamsu Che Dagi Jinsu Jibe Sunam Che Drola Penchara Sanje Droba Shu Sanje Chodan Soje Chonam Chanchu Pardo Dane Chamsu Che Dagi Jinsu Jibe Sunam Chi Drola Penchara Sanje Droba Shu Semchen Tamche Dewa Tan Devi Jodan Demba Church Dungar Tan Dunghai Che Jodan Trawa Church Dungar Mebe Dewa Tamba Tan Mendra Church Niren Cha Dan Dan Trave Dan Yom Chembo La Neba Church Chom Den De Jambe Yang Lai Chan Tsai Lo Kange Lo Zhe Dim Nye Zhen Zhe Nye Dara Nam Da Ram Sar Ve Chi Nye Dun Gun Chi Shen Si Chi Ni Je Tu Gar Le Wam Se Kanda Sibe Tsara Mari Mun Tum Dungar Chi Sir Ve Zho Tso Gun La Pu Jie Dar Ze Yan La Zhu Jue Yang Den Song Zhu Dar Che Zho Niu Mo Ni Long Le Jie Jia Zho Zhu Ze Qian Mari Mun Sir Dungar Niu Gu Chi Ni Jun Ze Ra Zhe Na Dene Ta Qian Sa Ju Tar Sun Yin Dene Liu Zo Gyar Se Tu Yu Gu Ju Zha Ju Tang Ju Ni Jin Zhe Na Liu Mun Sir Jian Bei Yang Lai Du Ze Den Ju Ji Qian Ra Bu Sir Qi Da Liu Di Mo Mun Ba Rab San Ga Dan Den Ju Xiong Lu Do Ba Yi Lo Zhi Bo Be Na Wa Tsar Du Sur.
Good afternoon. So this morning we went through briefly the noble truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and now we must also look at the fourth noble truth about the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. But before that, perhaps you have some questions or that you need some clarifications on the points. So I wanted to leave a little time for discussion. Hello, Rinpoche. If possible, I'd like to come back to the neutral aspect of suffering, the neutral feeling. What didn't you understand? Regarding the pleasant... Why is it suffering, you mean? Okay. It's suffering indirectly, if you wish. The neutral feeling is not an absence of feeling. It doesn't exclude a pleasant or or painful feeling. When you're in the neutral feeling, there is potential for a pleasant feeling and the potential for painful feeling. It's still there. So we saw the image, the metaphor of the toxic fruit. The effect of the fruit is not yet manifest, but the disposition is there. The disposition for pain to manifest itself. So even if you don't feel any pleasure or pain, there is the disposition that we could feel the sentiment of pleasure or pain that are both deception and suffering. So in that, and so the neutral feeling is also linked to deception. It's not beyond deception. So even if our mind is very stable to a certain degree and a certain degree of calm abiding, if there's not a discernment that dissipates all confusion, the grasping of the self that we spoke about, if that's not completely eliminated, then even just being able to be in calm abiding, even if desire and hatred is not manifest, we are not free of the becoming of the existence of the becoming of samsara. We're still in samsara. We shouldn't see samsara as two geographical places. Samsara designates above all the state of confusion in which we perceive a reality in a dual grasping and grasping of self, and we have feelings of pain, of pleasure, etc. And where this confusion perpetuates itself indefinitely. And so in our experience, there's birth and death and amnesia and rebirth, and so it goes on. So that's samsara. So if I'm not mistaken, it's a vocabulary issue. I didn't understand when you spoke about the volition of the I. I talked about volition. Volition is linked to will, of wanting. I want for myself. So we're in an attitude because of grasping the self. We always want something for self. We think that we can identify a self, an I, in a mistaken way. In reality, objectively, we cannot find this I, and because of this identification, there's always a fear for this I. We need to protect it. We need to obtain something for it. And I have the impression that it's associated to a feeling because I feel. So I think that there's a I or a self that feels because there's pleasure, because there's pain, and this feeling of pleasure and pain it cannot be separated from the grasping of self. So there's an illusion of pleasure, there's an illusion of pain, and so suffering and well-being are not something that exists in and of themselves. When I spoke about pleasure, of how it was in the nature of deception, when you look, it's just a fiction. There's not an objective reality that's pleasant. So due to our confusion, there may be this experience of pleasure and pain, but belongs to no one, because if it belonged to you, the self would have to exist. It manifests because of the grasping, because of being astray. So even though there is suffering, what the Buddha says, is that it belongs to no one. It doesn't exist, in fact, suffering. Just as pain and pleasure, when you really look for their substantiality, their objectivity, their inherent nature, we cannot find them. It's a fiction because we don't recognize the reality, because our mind does not remain in its original reality. It mistakes itself in this grasping of self. Is that clear? I cannot hear the question. We need the microphone in order to hear the question. In the grasping, can we say that if we're talking about the Buddha, there is no pain, no pleasure, no suffering? Yes, no. The Buddha is beyond. Is beyond this limit, these kinds of limits, beyond the duality of grasping of self. It's not a conditioned state. That's what I was trying to say earlier. It's beyond anything that's composite, that has parts, that depends of causes and conditions. It is linked to a quality. In the Mahayana, there are some teachings, in the Vajrayana also, that insist on the quality of mind as being completely free. There's a unconditioned quality that the Buddha discovered and actualized, and this is how he liberated himself from all afflictions, from all errors. So it's a mind free of affliction and free of afflictions, and as such of karma, of suffering. So sometimes we use the word cessation of suffering. So all the conditioning is extinguished. It doesn't mean that it's kind of there's nothing. There's an extinction. It's an actualization of the innate qualities of mind. But it doesn't correspond to the notion of self that we might have, of a being, inherent being. So does that mean that all awakened beings reach this state? Yes, well, that's what enlightened means, becoming a Buddha. Buddha means awakened, like awakened, as opposed as we might say someone who's asleep. In sleeping, there's no discernment. There's like obscuration. So for us, as the natural quality of our mind is to be free of since all times. We might take the analogy of gold. When we find gold, even if gold is perfectly pure, it always reveals itself with oxidation. So in sort of the same way, without beginning, because of not recognizing this reality, there is this occulting of obscuration that is present, and it's manifest in this impression of duality that leads us to identify and grasp a self. And if we can eliminate this ignorance, And it's not just because you received a teaching on this point that you have a glimpse of it that you're completely free, because there's such a habit. Even if there is this understanding in a conceptual way at the moment, at the conceptual level, this understanding is not really experienced. It's a conceptual understanding still, but then one has to familiarize oneself and then go beyond our confusion that is so profoundly anchored. As I said, it's like an intuition, non-conceptual intuition that's not even explicit, that's in us spontaneously. We don't have to convince ourselves that I am. It's like nearly obvious that it's like that. Our mistaken intuition is erroneous. Also, a question of vocabulary. The grasping of the I that you spoke about this morning, is it comparable to ego? So ego in the current language is more gross than grasping of self. Ego can be often linked to pride, but it's only possible because at the base there's a grasping of the self, but of an I. Ego is often in comparison. I'm different, or I'm better, I'm superior. There's a sort of self-cherishing and attachment to the superiority or the difference, the superiority of myself. So the ego in the current language, I have the impression that it's more understood like that. When we say someone has a lot of ego, it means he or she has a very high esteem of him or herself. But someone can be extremely humble, and it's not for that this person does not grasp a self. Somebody might meditate, have a lot of abnegation, and they might not have experienced the faults of pride and self-attachment, but the person is not free of ignorance. So here, ignorance is much more subtle. It's even more subtle. It's very, very subtle. I didn't really understand why there's a lack of adequation between notion of impermanence of self and the permanence. You spoke about the impermanence of mind and body, and I don't understand the link with the permanence. When we identify something, we first tried our implicit grasping, we give it an explicit explanation. We have this grasping of I, and when we think I, we don't necessarily think, oh, I am one and permanent. But by the fact of grasping an I, implicitly, we're affirming that there's one thing, not two, and on the other hand, that it's one thing and the same thing. The one I was, the one I am, the one I will be. And maybe there are parts of me that are different, that can be different, but the I itself, the self itself is the same. We implicitly believe that it stays the same. So implicitly we believe that the self is one and that stays the same, that doesn't change. That's where the idea of permanence comes from, something that doesn't change. Now, the second stage is trying to see is, can we identify this thing? Is it something inside us? What can I observe of my person? I can observe a body. I can observe feelings. I can observe concepts. I can observe so many things, perceptions. But all I can observe, all these things are all impermanent. There's not one that's constantly there. So we affirm that there's an I that's constant, but it doesn't correspond with any of the elements that I can observe. So there's something incompatible between my grasping and the reality that is observed. And then on the other, and furthermore, we said that it was one. But there's no psychophysical element that stays, that holds together without parts, that is permanent. So in this sense, we don't find anything in the psychophysical elements that correspond to an I. So we're grasping an entity that we can't observe. Like, for example, if we're looking at a flower, I have to be able to a definition and say this is it. But if I was to try and describe what the I is, I can't find in my psychophysical elements that this is what my self is. That corresponds to something that is one, that has no parts, that is permanent, that cannot be reduced, that is irreducible. So this self, this I, we might think that, well, maybe it doesn't have to be part of my psychophysical elements. It is the entity that possesses them. So because we say my mind, my body, as elements that are possessed by me, by self. So I can imagine that the self is distinct, but it's unobservable. We never see that these psychophysical elements are that, but we can imagine them. But if such an entity existed, why does it attach itself to the body? What does it care about the body? Since it can exist independently. So this is how we see that this grasping of self, of course we grasp it, but it doesn't have it doesn't have something to hang on to. And that's the definition of ignorance. We take something that's existent that's not existent. It's not something. It's not as if I'm confusing. It's not like I'm confusing a lily and a lotus. I can be in that kind of ignorance, but that's anecdotal. It's on something small. This is about all my positioning and my actions, my thoughts. Every thought I have at every moment of experience, I implicitly grasp an I, a self. And so this grasping of self, and this is another point I wanted to underline, it's not a sort of concept, an idea, a doctrine that we have. It's at a very basic level. Even an insect, an animal, all beings have it. It is the impression that the subject observes and that something is observed and that these two things are distinct, and that the one who observes is one and permanent. But there's not necessarily a concept behind it. Some people can't even formulate the idea of one and permanent. But there is the impression of being distinct and the same. And one. No more questions, so I'll continue with the subject. The fourth noble truth taught by the Buddha is how to liberate oneself from suffering. That's the path practice. In other words, the therapy proposed by the Buddha. So in terms of the treatment, there are some treatments in the ordinary world. There are good treatments and bad treatments. It's not because someone says, oh, this is the treatment, that it works. And so how do you distinguish a good treatment from one that's not effective, not efficient? The treatment is ineffective because it doesn't, if it does not include the etiology that doesn't act on the cause of the illness. So, for example, just to give an example, let's say, just off the top of my head, let's say you have a problem with your eyes. And so a special treatment for the liver is proposed. It's a treatment that will take care of one aspect, but it hasn't identified the cause of the illness. And if you haven't identified the cause of the illness, it's very difficult to find a solution. And that's the problem at an ordinary level. Many religions, many practices that we do to try to relieve suffering and pain is that as we haven't identified the problem, the cause, not ignorance, afflictions, negative actions, not having identified those as the problem, we undertake all sorts of activities that only reinforce ignorance, or only reinforce afflictions. And so instead of treating the problem, we make it worse. So this is often the case. And people say, oh, we have magnificent traditions, so we have lovely ceremonies and a magnificent architecture, millennial history, so many books, and lists of exemplary people from the past. So everyone will be ready to uphold or defend their own church, but this does not, or their tradition. But to be effective, a treatment has to respond to the problem. And I think that the specificity of Buddhism is that the Buddhism really identifies what the problem is. Suffering. Suffering is often not even the diagnosis. Buddhism leads us to make the right diagnosis, and then to really determine what is the cause of suffering. And then the Buddha can propose a treatment, we could say, a solution. And so all the methods, the practices consigned by the Buddha are taught in relation to a problem that we have and have to respond to this problem. So it's not a practice that's just cultural, limit to a particular culture. It's not as if Buddhism is It's not like ancient Indian culture that we're trying to transmit, or as we say today, transmitting French culture. The special classifications, AOC, of a specific region to preserve them that exists in France. In this sense, we see in Buddhism, in the teaching, there's no transmission of what we might call a specific culture linked to a particular geography or time or place. In this sense, there's no particular marriage rites in Buddhism, for example. This is something more cultural. So the Buddhist practice is not related to a culture, a language, a certain way of dressing, of belonging to a certain cultural group, of certain customs of a place and time. Many other religions transmit customs of a place and time. This doesn't mean to say that Buddhism incorporated into different cultures can't have a tradition of painting, architecture. We see it in the history of Buddhism. There are all kinds of Buddhist art of Southeast Asia, of India, of China, of Tibet. These are recurrent themes that are linked to the teaching. There are a large variety of styles, and we find this in other religions. But what I'm trying to say is that, but in terms of usages and customs that are specifically cultural, this is not Buddhism. So Buddhist practice has to respond to a problem. So if we really understand the origin of suffering, then we can catch a glimpse of the pertinence of the practices proposed by the Buddha. So what's this fundamental problem? It's ignorance. So the Buddhist practices, the Eightfold Noble Path, can be summarized in the Trichiksa, the three trainings, the three domains of learning, the three trainings, the three that we try to cultivate. The first, which as I would say is the most important, is wisdom. It's the opposite of ignorance. It is the fact of correctly knowing, of not being mistaken, of recognizing the absence of self, of recognizing the reality effectively as it is. This is the most important point. Enlightenment is going beyond suffering is not possible without eliminating our confusion. To my knowledge, there's no tradition, no spiritual tradition, other that puts forward to such an extent in Buddhism knowledge, because enlightenment doesn't depend on something else, on someone else, nor mortification of certain rituals. It depends above all on discernment, on wisdom. This is the key point. But this wisdom, to be cultivated, we have to familiarize ourselves, fully realize this discernment, fully actualize this discernment, and go beyond our disposition to going astray. And so it's important to help our mind become more stable Today we have a capacity of a very limited attention capacity. We're very easily distracted, and this distraction is the kind of engine of emotions, a desire, hatred. This is nourished by distraction. Not only do we lose sight of reality, but we fall into a biased understanding, and we just follow it by habit. That's our ordinary distraction. So we deviate from discernment, and then we fall into afflictions and hence into actions that are, that can be negative or positive, that can lead one to have an experience of pleasure or else. But we're still perpetuating conditioned existence. So the second domain of training is samadhi. Samadhi, it's prajna in Sanskrit. It's like superior knowledge, authentic knowledge, free of all cognitive bias of confusion that is beyond concepts. It's a direct and immediate knowledge of reality. And samadhi, literally, the term is to hold the natural immobility of mind. It's not as if we had to force our mind to become immobile. Its nature is immobile. It is free of agitation. Immobile, by this I mean free of agitation. Agitation is produced by afflictions and ignorance. So our support to wisdom, and for wisdom to be able to cultivate wisdom to its full, to completion, it has to lean on samadhi of a mind free of all agitation, an immobile, stable mind. And so, and these two are not possible if we don't have a discipline, an ethical discipline. And here we mean it's the lives we choose to live. If in our life we orient ourselves only to follow our desires, our afflictions, our anger, and we don't have we have no mastery of what the impulses that come up in our mind, and we just follow them. Our afflictions, I'll very quickly be embroiled in difficulties in life, and I won't have the freedom to access to samadhi, and even less to wisdom, because I'm completely embroiled in all these problems and difficulties in life. I mean, just an example, if I'm completely taken by desire and all I want is money, then I naturally cultivate dissatisfaction. And if I'm obsessed with money, and I'll try and amass and so pursuing objects of desire is like drinking salty water. The more we have, the more we want. And so we're completely taken by what we're undertaking. We have no more freedom to do what we want. What have we amassed? Nothing that we can really enjoy, because in any case we have to die, leave all these things aside. The very little time that we have the impression of enjoying them is something very ephemeral. our mind is completely troubled. We don't have time to develop our qualities of samadhi, to develop the natural qualities of mind. And on the contrary, if we're engaged in very negative acts by jealousy or conflict, conflictual activities, well, this will trouble us. I mean, and we could even put our lives in danger. Look at ourselves. How many people die in wars in the news every day? In Europe, in Ukraine, thousands of people are dying, killed by machines. It's horrible, horrible. We can't even imagine the suffering, the pain of their bodies exploded into millions of pieces. I mean, the worst than anything we hear from the Middle Ages, and it's happening today. And why? And it's why? Because of the lack of ethical discipline, and more profoundly, and why do we have this lack of ethical discipline? Because we believe in afflictions. We are attached to a desire. We are attached to hatred. It's me against the other. We're always in positioning ourselves as rivals to one another. And so the more that we put ourselves into rivalry with others, and we're fighting and we're hurting others, and even before harming others, it's towards oneself that we're really harming before all. As soon as anger arises in the mind, I've noticed that people have a lot of difficulties of turning away from the objects that creates anger. It's true that there are monsters in the world. There are horrible people, and so we feel that we have the right to feel hatred towards them because of this injustice. And if we tell them you shouldn't feel anger, it's nearly like we are supporting injustice, So, but if you really look in the experience, the moment that you feel hatred, the only person you're hurting is yourself. In the face of a monster, the more hatred I feel, the more disdain, the more scorn, the better I feel. I'm justice. I'm on the right path. I'm fighting against injustice. I'm fighting against someone who's doing negative things. We're all in this attitude, but when we have this sentiment, we're punishing ourselves, actually. The only person you're hurting when you feel hatred is first and foremost yourself. The person who's negative doesn't affect them at all. It doesn't hurt him at all. Whether you're angry against him, it nearly justifies his action. It doesn't mean to say that you have to approve. He's doing something negative. We want him to be happy. It's an object of compassion, in fact. He's creating for himself and for others enormous amount of suffering, but I don't have to do like him. So the lack of ethical discipline is the afflictions. It's pushed by affliction. This is our push by afflictions. So it's a progressive approach. Right now, I'm a beginner in the practice. I'm a beginner. I have a glimpse of the relevance of the Buddha's instructions of how it can be beneficial for me. I have a certain confidence, and so I want to follow the example of the Buddha. I can't immediately become a Buddha. I can't immediately be free of anger, hatred, of afflictions, of my straying. I can't do it immediately. But I can try to keep actions and conducts that will not accrue suffering for myself. So the ethical conduct of the Buddha, is that the objective? It's to avoid more suffering for oneself. In Buddhism, it's formalized through, for example, taking vows of nonviolence, not hurting other beings, not killing, not lying, not avoiding negative acts of body, speech, and thought, mind. So ethical discipline has to do with our physical and verbal conduct. So avoid negative actions that are harmful for others and ourselves. This is, in essence, the ethical discipline. So if we adopt this ethical discipline, we can assure ourselves a freer condition, a happier condition. If we follow our afflictions, we'll create for ourselves more problems. And then the other aspects of the training are just about accessible, very, very difficult. Not completely, so quite difficult. Not inaccessible, but difficult to attain, to reach. So not to forget ethical discipline, we take vows, some even adopt a certain way of life by becoming a monk or a nun. It's a matter of keeping a vigilance with regards to one's conduct, a conduct of body, of speech, in order not to harm other sentient beings. And so is that enough? Is discipline, ethical discipline enough? It can't be perfect if we don't eliminate afflictions and ignorance. So the veritable perfection of ethical discipline is, of course, enlightenment, is at the moment of enlightenment. But before that, we can try to dissipate afflictions. So what we often call in Buddhism meditation, to practice meditation, zazen, or you've heard about this. It's a very, very important practice in Buddhism. Some imagine that it's trying to be very focused, not to be distracted. Of course, the idea is to avoid distraction, but it's not the equivalent. It's not about just being focused on one thing. Meditation, samadhi, has as an objective still calm abiding, shamatha, cultivating calm abiding, which is shamatha. It's a very basic aspect of the meditation practice. We try to bring to our mind a state of peace, of stillness, of calm abiding. And when there is desire, hatred, jealousy, pride, there cannot be any peace in the mind. The mind is profoundly agitated. For example, there are people who practice today, I heard, snipers who practice meditation to be more focused, to better attain their targets. That's not meditation in Buddhism, because it is not eliminating hatred. It's just being focused, concentrated. That's not shamatha. In shamatha, there is, of course, the aspect of not being distracted, but it's not only about being focused on one point. With kind of a resentment, with that's not it. It's not that kind of concentration. It's a lot of effort, in fact. And here, it's trying to let the natural capacity of the mind to be serene and peace, quiet. And this is possible when our mind is free from desire, hatred, jealousy, afflictions. So meditation is above all cultivating a a mind free of afflictions, but of course afflictions are there as long as there's ignorance. So in terms of the order of practice, we start by adopting an ethical discipline, and this means that in our life we can improve our conditions, we can assure for our future life a happy existence. It doesn't lead us to liberate from conditioned existence, but at least create the more favorable conditions. And by shamatha, we eliminate afflictions. We subjugate, tame the afflictions. We learn to appreciate the mind that is naturally serene. And so because we hold our mind in this immobility, the afflictions are not present. And so when there is the recognition of the ultimate nature of mind, that is the non-self, emptiness, then afflictions are completely eliminated. We have access to what can eliminate them, but we have to continue cultivating this discernment. And so in this discernment, there's no affliction, there's no confusion, there's no cognitive bias, no accumulation of negative karma, all the becoming, all the perpetuation of suffering will be progressively and completely eliminated. So kind of that gives you an overview of some of the fundamentals, I would say, of Buddhism, which are here, which are shared by all the traditions of Buddhism, whether it is whatever the vehicle, whatever the tradition, the Buddhist tradition that's being evoked, these points are shared by all, and probably explained with the words, the translations that might be a little different, but the fundamental message is that's I'm trying to give you a glimpse of it. And the next point that's important to look at is to turn ourselves towards the great vehicle. So to better understand the term vehicle, vehicle designates our capacity. Our capacity to express in our understanding, it's associated with our understanding and expressed in our motivation. There's a teaching that summarizes these distinctions. It's a teaching on separating from the four attachments. The first attachment is the attachment to this life. If we're attached to this life, we are not a Dharma practitioner. We're not practicing a religion or a spiritual path, whatever the term we choose. We're only preoccupied with this life. Have the comfort, money, having, everything is limited to this life, to this identity, to this body. So this focus on this life only can be reinforced by erroneous beliefs in by annihilationism, as we saw earlier. We have to consume, eat, enjoy, because after there's nothing. There's nothing after. So our acts have no consequences on our becoming. There's no morality. There's no negative or positive acts. It's just about getting, seeking pleasure in this life. And some people have this attitude. It's only focused on this life. So if there's that, there's no spiritual practice. There's no place for spiritual practice, or there's no place for ethical discipline. So as I briefly mentioned before, in the Buddha's teachings, we affirm that the perceptions we have and what we experience is not something that's secreted by the brain, but it's the instant of it's the preceding instant of experience that gives the present instant, and that has all the potential to generate the next moment of experience. So we can't find one moment where the consciousness begins and where this continuum of mind ends. It is without beginning and without end, because it's the instant that preceded it. And so every instant was preceded by an instant, and you can go way, way back. To the moment you're born. There was a clear and knowing moment. There were qualities of perception present, but it was also present in the body of in the womb, and just before the moment of conception, this instant of consciousness identified itself with the embryo as an I. So this instant was preceded by another instant associated with the moment between life and death, and so this is so we can have an infinite number of lives and the mind will continue to have an innumerable number of lives until we are liberated from illusion. As long as karma is there, as long as affliction is there, then conditioned existence will last. So some affirm, some think, wrongfully, in fact, that there is rebirth because something is reborn. We think that if there's rebirth, that must mean that there's something, that there's an I that is reborn. That's not this body, but there's an I, a self. But I would like to underline that rebirth is possible because there's no self. If there was a self that existed in a substantive way, how would it be? How would it be reborn? Because if it were permanent, rebirth means that it changes, and it can't change. And then we could look at it another way. If we rebirth, if there's a self, either the self is pure or impure. So in Hinduism, we have the affirmation of different castes, the Brahman, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, Sutras, the Chandas. They're all types of classifications. It's It's imagine that they each have their self, their soul, the soul of the self of the Brahman being pure by birth. He is pure, no matter what he does. Even steal, lie. By nature, he's pure because his self is pure, the Brahman. There's the untouchable, and by nature he is impure. He might be generous, kind, full of compassion, helpful to others, intelligent, but he will always be impure because his soul is impure by nature. So if there exists a self that is permanent, there's no possibility of changing. It's pure nature or impure nature, but as we saw, this imperceptible, ungraspable self, the qualification of a self of impure or pure cannot be grasped. And it's because there's not this permanence that one can become animal or human again according to one's behavior, according to one's actions. You can be reborn in a favorable condition, unhappy condition. You can be an insect, or being reborn as an animal. Everything is possible. The mind and its qualities allows everything because by nature it is emptiness. And hence, where there is emptiness, there are all possibilities. Emptiness is not just about absence. It means everything is possible. And what possibilities manifest themselves depend on the actions that we undertake. So all these different forms of life possible is happens because there is no I, and because if there were an I, how would birth be possible? So I just wanted to underline this point because often the Buddhism says, "Oh, there's no I," and yet there's past and future birth. So I just wanted to answer that point. So coming back to this, if we are attached to these lives, we're denying the possibility of a future life. So in a sense, all religions kind of confirm some kind of continuity beyond death. For instance, in monotheistic religions in the West, there's a life after that would be eternally happy or unhappy. There is not the notion of multiple lives. There's only one chance, or maybe two, because there's the purgatory. In other religions, there are different ideas, but it's just to underline that religions share the notion that there is something beyond this life, and so insist on our behavior, our practice, not be focused just on this life, but that we adopt a morality for some, practices for others, that are able to ascertain our happiness beyond this life. We're not only concerned with happiness in this life. The meaning of this life is not just about consumption, enjoyment. Life takes on its meaning by going beyond this life, developing inner qualities of integrity. So in different religions, we in terms of ethical discipline, we see common strands. For example, not hurting other sentient beings. For some in monotheistic religions, it means not killing another human being. So, and at some stage in history, we wondered if black people were human beings, and so they were not considered as real human beings, so they could be killed, and so all these in looking back in history, so there were all these discriminations happen. It's like you can hurt others if they're not your equal. So in Buddhism, we talk about every sentient being, no distinction between sentient beings, color of skin, of knowledge, age, sex. There's absolutely no distinction. And even towards animals, big animals, small animals, ones that can be eaten or not, we try to treat all with kindness, compassion, to not hurt them, not harm them, to not harm other sentient beings. So this is another important point. It's the aspect of nonviolence that we find in Buddhism. Nonviolence, not harm. It's very important. And I think that Buddhism is the only spiritual tradition that is perfectly and fully in a nonviolent conduct. In some religions, like in the Jain religion, which is important in India, they practice nonviolence to a very high degree, with a very great abnegation, self-abnegation. But the practitioner doesn't, but the practitioner can harm him or herself. And so deliberately, not to hurt others, they deliberately hurt themselves. So in this sense, it's not completely nonviolent. In the Buddhism, the way it's taught, nonviolence is not a form of sacrifice, where we'll mortify ourselves or sacrifice or suffer to help others. It's to adopt a conduct that is beneficial for others and for self, that is not harmful for others and not harmful to self. And that's why it's perfectly nonviolent. So to adopt a spiritual practice can be purely interested in the causality. So if we are only attached to this life, it's a denial of causality, that our actions influence our future lives. If we are aware of this, if we become aware of this, we can discern what are the conducts, what are the behaviors that ensure happiness in the future. And so instead of attaching to the thing of well-being, longevity, etc., we identify the causes and we practice. We try and cultivate them. So it's about not only being attached to this life, but also to being attached to our future life. We're not only, we don't only care about who I am now, but who I will be in my future life, that I won't be an insect, an animal, that I will be born in favorable conditions. So now I have to focus on the causes. So some religions might teach causes that are not causes. For example, sacrifice of self to kill a lot of people, like for terrorists who to go to heaven, they kill others. It's a complete ignorance of causality. And if we really look at the law of causality, we'll never allow them to obtain it. It will put them into even worse destinies that could last for a very, very long time. So we should have compassion for these beings. So all ethical discipline in Buddhism is not based on customs and usages, but on the observation of causality. We see what behaviors, what actions create in us suffering or not. And so ethical discipline is based on this natural causality, how actions and thoughts determine our future. What are the actions that try to cultivate favorable, positive actions and avoid negative ones? And if we have this approach, it is about not becoming attached to this life, if we take this approach. But of course, we are still attached to samsara. We're attached to our conditioned perception. We want this conditioned perception to be happy. So if we're attached to samsara, we don't really engage ourselves in the path of the Buddha. We're not veritably on the Buddha's path. The Shravaka vehicle, they see suffering. They realize suffering. They see that this pleasant feeling that we spoke about is deception. So we want to go beyond the suffering. So this understanding of suffering and this veritable intention to go to engage oneself in going beyond suffering. This is in the Buddhist is Ninjung. This is in Buddhist literature. Ninjung means the veritable emergence of the path towards enlightenment. Sometimes the term renouncement is used by translators. There's a real veritable discernment in terms of suffering. There's no attachment to samsara, to this life, and to a conditioned existence, whatever it is. For example, for a Shravaka practitioner, a heavenly life is the same as being in flames. It's all deception. There's no attraction to it. And this comes from an understanding of suffering. And so if this understanding is present, then we can really consider that we are starting to engage in the path of the Shravakas. And so what characterizes the path of the Shravakas? It's the desire to liberate from conditioned existence entirely, to be free from suffering. So here there's a certain degree Rangdun in Tibetan, pursuit of one's ultimate good. We look for our ultimate well-being. We see that it's not in conditioned existence. It's in what's beyond conditioned existence, nirvana. It's beyond suffering, and that's what we identify as our ultimate well-being, and we pursue it. And it doesn't exclude the fact that we cultivate compassion, kindness, generosity. All these qualities are present, and all the more so when you understand suffering for oneself, you understand it for others. And so veritable compassion and kindness are possible. If we don't understand suffering, then the compassion we'll have is superficial. It's not real. Not real compassion. So if we're attached to this life, we're not a practitioner of Dharma. If we're attached to samsara, we don't have Ninjung, the real emergence of the path, or renouncement. If there's an interest for oneself, there cannot be bodhicitta. third point. So the vehicle of the bodhisattvas is distinguishes itself. The practice is not pursued for one's ultimate well-being, but for the well-being of all beings. It's not only others, only certain other people. It's for self and others. We consider that considering the well-being of all beings is also considering one's own ultimate well-being. So enlightenment here is not just to go to access beyond suffering. It is to manifest all the qualities that is to give access to the greatest number of people to reach enlightenment, both at a temporary and ultimate level. This is the objective of bodhisattvas. I will speak more about this tomorrow, about this point, because the text that we're studying cannot be understood if we don't understand these distinctions, and in particular, if we don't correctly understand the path of the bodhisattvas. So if you have any other questions on the points that we just raised. I've had a question for a long time on my mind. We talk about compassion for all sentient beings, and I wonder about plants. Maybe because we're in a region where we're felling forests and trees, and so it's a question with regards to plant life, vegetation. So the answer. So it's true that we can focus on sort of details with regarding one's conduct. For example, if I cut the grass, if I killed a sentient being, if I've cut a tree, if I've done something bad. In Buddhism, it is the intentional act that counts, the intention. For example, if we're walking and by accident we squash an insect that we didn't want to squash, have we accumulated a karma that will have a negative retribution of this act? We can ask the question. In Buddhism, it is taught that karma is accumulated by an act that is volitional, that was wanted. If by mistake we squash an insect, we haven't. It happens by accident. The fact that it didn't happen intentionally, we haven't accumulated this negative karma. We look at the news a lot. Our biased mind tends to take sides. We see someone who killed someone else, and we're happy about it, and we rejoice about it. Somehow we participate in this act because we've rejoiced through volition. So it's the mind that accumulates the karma. So regarding plants, to answer your question, of course, plants are living. They grow. They're different from minerals, even though minerals can sometimes grow. Generally speaking, in Buddhism, the difference from the Jain religion. In the Jain religion, they consider that plants are living and sentient beings, whereas in Buddhism, we don't consider plants as sentient beings. in the same way as insects and animals. The reason is that the plant does not manifest the characteristics of a sentient being. In the sense, for example, you can take a branch and this branch can get roots and become a tree. You can't do this with a sentient being. You can't demultiply it in this way. It's a definition that's given. So what was the teaching on the subject of the Buddha? It's hard to precisely know, because the Buddha also gave certain rules to his disciples and to monks that were with him, not to cut trees, not to till the land, not to be in an activity of managing the land, taking care. So there are several explanations. I mean, the one is that that monks had to live dependent on lay people. They shouldn't be autonomous financially. It could be one way of interpreting it. Another way of interpreting it is, in that sense, it would be kind of a conventionally negative activity, because monks had to live in society with others, or Buddha gave this rule because it was negative by nature. I think we have to be careful with the management of plants and what have you, not because it's the plant itself as a sentient being, but because the plant is the home, the abode of a large number of sentient beings, and the plants live in an ecosystem or in relationship to many other plants and animals that depend on each other. So sometimes it's necessary to cut plants, and it can help the environment, and sometimes it can be harmful. So I don't think there's a very clear answer in terms of Buddhism, apart from what I just said. In terms of, there's no categorical choice. I have a question on Nejung. You said it was like the engine of the Shravakas. But can we say that we're practitioners of the great vehicle without having this Nejung? In the same way as knowing these Four Noble Truths, even if they are part of the Shravaka vehicle, it's the base of developing an enlightened mind. Can we say that we're practitioners of the great vehicle without Nejung? Without real Nejung, veritable Nejung? Answer: if there's not an understanding of suffering, there's no intention of helping all other sentient beings. So it's not as if on one side the Shravaka is disinterested in samsara and the bodhisattva is attached to samsara. The difference is that the Shravaka above all wants to liberate himself. The bodhisattva wants to help other sentient beings. So he not ultimately, but he is attached to being close to beings to accomplish their well-being. So some of them, not all of them, but some of them will adopt a conduct that is different. that can be more accessible to other sentient beings. The bodhisattva makes the wish to be born and reborn in samsara in order to help a very large number of beings. So if he helps that he can see that he can help a sentient being, he is not attached to a particular form of life, whereas the Shravaka is attached to a form of life that ensures as fast as possible his salvation. The bodhisattva isn't attached like this to a conduct that will that will save him. He's interested in a conduct that will benefit all beings, but it doesn't. Of course, Nejung is there. It doesn't exclude Nejung. Nejung is there. So the bodhisattva can all these labels don't have defined characteristics. For the Shravaka, if the Shravaka takes a Pratimoksha vows as a layperson, in his appearance he is a lay person. If he takes the wishes of individual liberation, bhikshu, he or she is identified as a monk or nun. These are aspects of lifestyles that can be identified. But for the bodhisattva, there's not a specific lifestyle that would define him or her. It can be a monk, a layperson. He can have he can have in daily life an appearance that is different. It's not associated with a particular lifestyle, or it's a matter more linked to attention and motivation. We'll talk a bit more about it tomorrow. It's linked to motivation and intention. The question is about disinterest in samsara. You can have a social position. We still have an interest in this way of functioning. If it's not really anchored in us, this disinterest, we're still looking for something in samsara. In the great vehicle, do we have this kind of thought? For the practitioner of the great vehicle, all these ordinary pursuits of the world they don't have an attachment for this life. But does it mean that a bodhisattva can't accumulate wealth, that he or she can't be in an external activity? But he won't do it for this life. He will might do it to help other beings, to ensure that the Dharma can be transmitted in good conditions, that he can do all sorts of activities that aren't necessarily defined by a cultural kind of lifestyle or behavior. But in essence, all the actions that he will undertake will be undertaken in accordance with the ethical conduct of Dharma that is not harmful to other beings, that is not harmful to him or herself. So there are bodhisattvas. I mean, there are stories of the Buddha's former lives, past lives. The Jataka, the Buddha becoming the historical Buddha, was a bodhisattva that is not fully enlightened. But as a bodhisattva, he cultivated bodhicitta and worked for the well-being of others. Sometimes he was animal, sometimes he was human, sometimes he was a king, a tradesman, a simple student, all sorts of life conditions. There are many stories that the Buddha told that you can learn about. Sometimes he was an animal, many stories. So one shouldn't disregard animals. We might have a bodhisattva in front of us who might be much more advanced than us in their understanding, so we shouldn't be scornful towards anyone, because a bodhisattva can be hiding in anyone. And we can all become bodhisattvas. We can all become Buddhas. It's a quality that we can really develop. So thank you for your attention.